The 74-year-old Richard Gere, who once enthralled millions with his roles in Pretty Woman and American Gigolo, didn't discuss a role, a movie, or a feat. All he spoke about was women. A straightforward admission that momentarily stopped the world. The fact that they were mistaken did not lead to my divorce. Because I wasn't worthy of surviving, I got divorced. After 3 marriages, a guy who was once praised as Hollywood's most charming gentleman had finally realized that love isn't about finding the perfect person, but rather about being the right person at the right time. He was once the movie industry's and media's darling, had married one of the world's top supermodels, and had loved the most beautiful women on the planet. He didn't discover a connection he didn't have to hold on to until he was almost 70 years old. A lady who didn't come to change him but stayed, and a love that didn't demand performance. And Richard Gere declared that she was his true love. This is more than just a Hollywood star's romantic journey. It's the path of a guy from notoriety to isolation, from anxiety to calm, from dominance to comprehension. A path toward learning to love, not by instinct, but via development. A lanky young man from Pennsylvania, Richard Gere studied philosophy at the University of Massachusetts, played the trumpet, and composed music for school plays before he became a romantic movie star. However, he then abandoned everything to pursue a career in theater, where he could adopt a different identity and lead a different life. It's possible that Richard Gere became used to portraying the endearing man from a young age, both on and off screen. He was always surrounded by women because of his enigmatic, reserved manner and deceptively appealing features. Richard's early relationships, however, came and went swiftly, passionate enough to be intoxicating but never staying long enough to last, much like how he always seemed to evade classifications. From his Days of Heaven co-star Penelope Milford, who remained with him throughout the 1970s, to the brief but profoundly influential romance with Sylvia Martins, who took him to Nepal, introduced him to Tibetan lamas, and laid the groundwork for meditation in Buddhism, to Carol Mallory, the fiery model who once compared him to a jewel shooting across the sky, to Dawn Steele, an editor at Penthouse who would go on to become the first female head of a major U.S. film studio. These ladies were bold, smart, and attractive. However, at the time, Richard Gere saw love as merely a brief phase of his quest for self-awareness. From searching for Mr. Goodbar, Days of Heaven, and American Gigolo, he was on the rise, but he was also slipping into a place where no one had ever taught him how to keep a woman. Party murmurs, paparazzi flashbulbs, and the lonely evenings spent in hotel rooms following filming. Together, they painted a picture of Richard Gere who exuded brilliance but felt empty inside. He may have had no real plans to settle down because of this. Since even he was still unsure of what he needed, the women continued to come and leave. Too deep to hold, too unsafe to put your trust in. He just knew this. He was living a fast-paced life and was far from prepared to stop. When photographer Herb Ritz threw a barbecue party in Beverly Hills in 1988, 39-year-old Richard Gere met 22-year-old Cindy Crawford, who had just appeared on the covers of the world's leading fashion magazines. 2 separate worlds were represented by them. At one point, the actor was called the sexiest guy alive, while she was a rising star in a fashion business that was about to go up. Then, quickly, profoundly, and unexpectedly, they fell in love. Shortly after they shared a New York apartment, the world was in awe. A couple too famous, too gorgeous. Richard Gere, a dapper and sophisticated dude. One of America's greatest beauties is Cindy Crawford. They may be found everywhere. Magazines, advertisements, and red carpets. Becoming the legendary pair of the 1990s. 2 individuals, however, were moving at wildly disparate beats behind the lights. Being a young lady who had grown up too quickly in a world full of lights, Cindy was still figuring out who she was and where the boundaries were between her public persona and her true self. She was trying to keep her body in check while rushing from picture session to promotion in an effort to win over those who wanted to make her a living brand. After 20 years as Hollywood's ideal man, Richard had started to grow weary of the crowds. He looked for calm, meditated, worked as a humanitarian, and retreated into private areas away from cameras. They were married in a very private ceremony in 1991 in Las Vegas, with silver foil rings, without any guests or media, just 2 individuals clinging to something lovely. It was already beginning to elude him. However, marriage cannot make distance go away. Cindy got into airplanes while Richard was meditating. She persisted in attempting to become the woman he needed even as he sat motionless in quiet. She once remarked, "I lost myself trying to be the woman he needed." 2 people living like roommates and a developing stillness were all that existed, no scandal or treachery. Schedules and emotions are no longer in sync. They got a quiet divorce in 1995. No legal action, no foul language. Other than a persistent question mark, the media had no idea what to write. Why did the ideal pair split up? After over 30 years, Richard finally said one sentence, short but sufficient. I was in love with a woman who was still unsure of herself. I believed that love could provide her a sense of security. That was an unreasonable assumption, though. Nobody was wrong. Simply said, they didn't cross paths at the ideal moment in their lives. One continued to fly. The other one had touched down. Richard Gere avoided loud romances after he and Cindy Crawford were divorced. He stopped showing up on magazine covers alongside young supermodels. He chose to withdraw in silence, travel throughout Asia, study Tibetan Buddhism, meditate, and play slower, more complex characters in movies. Following emotional upheaval, he met Carey Lowell, a stunning, experienced, and composed actress who was formerly a Bond girl in License to Kill. Without any glamour or commotion, Carey seemed like a tranquil sanctuary, which Richard then thought was his ultimate destination. 1995 saw them start dating. They had a calm life together and had a kid named Homer James Gere in 2000. At the age of 51, Richard became a father for the first time. Their marriage took place in a private ceremony in 2002. A tiny family decided to settle in Pound Ridge, New York, away from the spotlight, where Carey spent the majority of her time as a mother. There were no paparazzi, red carpets, or media attention. Richard also continued his humanitarian efforts, read books, made a few films, and planted vegetables. Sometimes, however, parallel patients offer the sense of steadiness. Behind that serene appearance, two individuals were gradually slipping out of each other's circle. Richard has a deep introversion. He would meditate for hours on end, engrossed in retreats in Nepal or Tibet, and captivated by ideas of silence and detachment. Even though she was less frequently in front of the camera, Carey still required social space, mobility, and connection in order to feel alive. They were spotted together less frequently as time passed. Both during film events and ceremonies. While one would go, the other would not. Scheduling is no longer in sync. Silence was speaking, but no one was saying it out loud. In 2013, following 18 years of dating and 11 years of marriage, Carey Lowell formally filed for divorce. Although the declared reason was irreconcilable differences, individuals close to Carey disclosed deeper truths that suggested she felt excluded from her husband's world. The key to the spirit of the house she resided in was not in her possession. Richard continued to think that stillness was a sign of tranquility in the meanwhile. It wasn't until everything started to fall apart that he realized that stillness is no longer tranquility when it lasts too long. Although I didn't hear it, it's a signal. The 3-year divorce was prolonged by financial issues rather than emotional ones. More than $45 million in assets and real estate in different locations resulted in numerous court cases. However, they made one mistake in the midst of the stress. They decided to split custody of their son, Homer, who was regarded as calm and sensitive, just like his father. Both Richard and Carey remained silent following the divorce. A profound, silent sense that something had broken was all that was left. Nobody had betrayed anyone other. No one got lost. It was just that. At one point, two people were unable to touch each other because they were too honest about their nature. Richard Gere was virtually forgotten in the press after Carey Lowell. No red carpet pictures, no award shows, and no interviews. It was supposed that he had decided to spend the remainder of his life in solitary contemplation, meditation, and fatherhood. But genuine love showed up right when he had given up looking. While his divorce from Carey Lowell was still pending in 2014, Richard Gere made an unexpected appearance next to Padma Lakshmi, a model, author, and Top Chef host. Although it never made the news, the relationship piqued the interest of the media. There were claims that Richard and Padma met at a charity event, spoke backstage for hours, and were sometimes seen together for dinner, but there were no pictures of the couple together or interviews that proved their passion. Both had scars of their own at the time. Richard was in the process of divorcing his wife of 18 years. After splitting from millionaire Ted Forsman, her little daughter's spiritual father, Padma had recently recovered from heartbreak. Instead of finding a spark of fire, they discovered a tired understanding in one another. Richard reportedly discovered in Padma a calm joy, lengthy chats, straightforward dinners, and the absence of any role-playing during those short months. However, they both realized at the same time that they were in quite different stages of life. In addition to being famous, energetic, and drawn to the intensity of international events and television, Richard yearned for peace, quiet, meditation, and Padma. After almost 6 months, they called it quits with no regrets. No quarrels, no scandal. They thought it would be best to remain friends because their lives were too busy going in different directions, according to a close source. If there was one lasting impression from this brief relationship, it was of a slower Richard Gere who no longer loved to fill a void or out of loneliness. He was coming to terms with the fact that love alone isn't always enough to keep someone around and that peace cannot be imposed. And maybe it was from that same spot that the desire to search in silence subsided. Richard Gere started to give up all hopes, stopped looking for love, and stopped waiting for a miracle. At that very moment, Alejandra Silva, the last person to enter his life without making noise, exerting pressure, or requiring holding, came into his life. As the saying goes, love finds you when you stop looking for it. After 3 marriages, years of roving between monasteries and movie sets, and a series of enthralling but brief relationships, Richard Gere finally sat still. No pursuing or making an attempt to prove anything. And that was the precise moment Alejandra Silva came into his life. Not as talented as Cindy Crawford or as stage-savvy as Carrie Lowell. A Spanish woman with gentle blonde hair, serene eyes, and the tender heart of a social crusader, Alejandra Silva never imagined falling in love again. She was parenting her child by herself after a recent divorce and was also in charge of the Reyes Foundation, which fights homelessness in Madrid. She had slept on the streets to understand the pain of those without shelter, and once openly shared, "I'd rather not do it at all." In 2014, at a hotel owned by her family in Positano, Italy, they met again. At the time, was quietly stepping out of his second marriage. She, too, was buried in divorce papers, weary. But when they looked at each other, they didn't see the past. They saw a peaceful version of the future they could build together. Richard Gere took the first step. Quietly. Gently. He sent flowers every day, wrote short songs, penned handwritten letters, not to conquer her, but as a whisper. "I'm ready to stay if you need someone beside you." Alejandra initially declined. She was wary of the 33-year age gap. She knew he was a global star. She didn't want to be the next woman of Richard Gere, but he didn't give up. He didn't persuade. He waited. He was simply there, quiet, patient, enough for her to see this wasn't another romance. This was a home. They married in April 2018 in an intimate Buddhist ceremony in New York. Alejandra converted beforehand, not because Gere asked, but because she found herself in the very things he believed in. She said, "I didn't ignore the age difference. But when karmic energy between two people is strong enough, differences become secondary." And she later told Ola, "Meeting Richard Gere felt like someone reaching out, pulling me out of the dark and showing me the way. I was lost. He was the light." After the wedding, they moved into a peaceful estate in Pound Ridge, the same place Gere had lived with Carrie Lowell. But this time he didn't build walls. They left the doors open. They lived together like companions, no control, no expectations, no roles to perform. In 2019, they welcomed their first son, Alexander. In 2020, their second child was born. The name kept private, but not the joy. On Instagram, Alejandra often shared glimpses of family walks, meditation sessions, or their 2 children reaching out to catch the autumn sun. Richard Gere once said of his wife, "She's the funniest, smartest, most sensitive, brave woman who knows what she wants. I don't need her to be anyone else, and I don't need to play the perfect husband. We live close, without needing to explain." Alejandra calls him the kindest man I've ever met. He's not just a thoughtful partner, writing music for her each morning, still sending flowers even after marriage, but also a peaceful father. Holding his children as they fall asleep, always putting family first. People often ask, how do you keep love alive? The answer, Richard Gere doesn't hold on. Alejandra doesn't hold on. They walk side by side without control. They touch each other with understanding, not with expectation. They respect their differences, but don't force themselves to become the same. One is deeply introverted, drawn to silence and meditation. The other is outwardly engaged, fighting for human rights and the homeless. And they met, not because they were alike, but because they shared the same depth of rhythm in their hearts. This is not the passion of youth. This is the love of 2 people who have once broken, but never lost their capacity to love. A man who had divorced 3 times. A woman who had walked through the wreckage of marriage, and in the end, both understood. Love isn't about holding on to someone. It's about never making them feel they have to try to stay. In a rare moment when he spoke about his wife, Richard once said, "She is the most generous woman I've ever known, with others and with me." A simple sentence, yet enough to explain why. He never had to look any further. Some relationships are built on passion. Some are held together by commitment. And then there are relationships, like that of Richard Gere and Alejandra Silva, that form not out of lack, not to fill a void, but because both people were already whole. Neither came in with the mindset of searching. Neither hoped the other would fix them, complete them, or become someone they had idealized. She didn't need Richard to be romantic, like in the movies. And Richard didn't need her to resemble any woman he had known before. They met, with nothing left to prove and no one left to hold on to. No media contracts, no pressure to appear in public, no need to showcase wedding photos. Just short songs Richard wrote each morning, handwritten letters Alejandra kept, peaceful dinners where the laughter of their children drowned out the noise of everyday life. People often say, if you want to keep someone, never let them feel like they have to try so hard to stay. And maybe Richard Gere took many years to understand that. While Alejandra, after years of tendon-tearing pain from a divorce, also came to realize, love isn't the thing that makes you lose yourself. The right kind of love is the one where you get to be your truest self. They don't try to control each other. No need to track schedules. No need to justify feelings. They just show up, they are present, and they live together with complete understanding, like two people who have walked through all the pain and finally found a place quiet enough to let something bloom. Richard Gere was once a face that lit up every screen. Now, he is a man living in a house with no reporters waiting at the gate. At 74, he no longer appears regularly in the press, no longer walks red carpets, or answers the same recycled interview questions. People don't know what film he's working on, because maybe he isn't. Or if he is, it's likely a quiet, independent project, one that doesn't need the box office or the Oscars. Instead of camera lenses, he now spends his time with Alejandra and their 2 young sons at a farmhouse in Pound Ridge, where the grass grows past the knees and morning fog cloaks the hills. A day in his life looks like this: making tea or coffee for his wife, not calling an assistant. Walking the dog along the stone path behind the house, no paparazzi. Gardening, reading Buddhist texts, playing piano for the kids in the evening. And sometimes, driving them to school in an old SUV, no bodyguards. There are no more scenes to shoot. Each day is real. He still maintains close ties with humanitarian organizations, especially those focused on Tibet, human rights, and homelessness. But now, he does it all in silence. No speeches, no live streams, no awards. Alejandra, his wife, continues to run the Reyes Foundation in Spain. They don't do charity to be applauded. They do it because it's the right thing. And with their family, every moment is kept private. A photo of a walk through the autumn woods. A Christmas snapshot captioned simply, "From our home to yours, wishing you peace." Gere once said, "I don't need to be in Hollywood to know I still exist." Perhaps that's why he never formally announced his retirement. He just chose to step back, quietly, completely. No more acting, no more roles, just living. In the gentlest way. Richard Gere was once known for playing charming magnetic men, but now he plays only one role, and it may be the most important of his life: being a father, being a husband, and being a peaceful man. Which love story from Richard Gere's life stays with you the most? Was it the dazzling marriage with Cindy Crawford? The long silence with Carrie Lowell? Or the quiet but radiant life with Alejandra Silva? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever believed that love always arrives late, leave a comment. Yes, I think so, to let us know that you too believe in Richard Gere's love story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories about the life journeys of your favorite stars.